Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first official episode of the You're Never Alone podcast. I'm your host, Jake Ranney. Before I begin, I would like to make another warning that some mature description and mature topics are going to be discussed. That being said, it may trigger some listeners as well. Um, But with that being said, let's jump into it. I felt like it was important for the first episode, well, the first official episode beside the welcome message, to be my story, um, and why I thought it was important to start this podcast. Um, the steps that were taken that led towards me um, being comfortable enough to share my story in hopes that others would do the same. So basically, let's start at the very beginning. Um, it was December of 2022. I had just gotten out of the hospital for some medical problems that um, are a whole other subject on their own. And without getting too far into those, basically, I had to relearn how to walk, talk, bathe myself, all of those everyday essential actions were all retaught to me in the hospital. Um, and shout out to Children's Hospital of Los Angeles for making all those so accessible to receive help for. Um, and I wouldn't be here without them. Anyways, back on topic, I had just been out of the hospital. I decided that it would have been a good idea for me to go back into swim training, which was something that I was passionate about, um, and still am kind of. But I had my grandma reach out to my swim instructor at a local gym near where we live, and basically my swim instructor and I had um started our swim session that day, and my grandma had decided to leave because she had some errands, and she wasn't needed, and I didn't want her to just have to sit there all day. Well, for the hour and a half ish that I was planning on being there. Um, and so the hour of swimming lessons had basically passed, and we were talking after me and the instructor. We're talking on the deck for a little bit, and um, since I had just come back from these medical dealings that I had been dealt, I thought it would have been a good idea for me to go into the locker room hot tub because the jets would have helped my back. Um, and so I had gotten in, and I noticed that this one person was giving me some very unwanted attention, and that escalated um, and began like making me very, very uncomfortable. And I felt that it was important for me to get out of the hot tub. So I found an ADA shower, um, which was the only one left, and it was only a curtain. It wasn't an actual door compared to the other ones. So I hid behind the curtain, um, and noticed through there was a little crack in the curtain where I could like peek out, and kind of was able to close it all the way before it was noticeable. Um, and I had noticed that he had gotten out, and basically I waited a little bit longer. Someone had come up to me and asked me if I was okay. I basically lied, and I just said, yeah, I'm gonna be getting ready to go here in a second. So I walked to my locker. Just so happened to be that this person's locker was catty corner to mine. So basically I went and I hid in the what is a changing room, but it looks like a janitor's thing. So if you didn't really know that it was a dressing room, then you would think it was like a janitorial closet. So I hid in there, and within like a minute, he was in there. He forced me to do things orally, and he forced me penetration wise. He forced me up against the wall and had his hands on my neck. Um, and then when he was done, I asked him, well, am I like okay to go? Because I was scared to leave without his permission at that time. And I he was I was met with his response of, yeah, there's too many people around to do anything else. Um, so I ran to my locker. I started getting my stuff out. He was still standing by his locker, which, as stated earlier, was catty corner to mine. Um, so I grabbed my phone and took a picture of him real quick and grabbed the towels that I used to clean myself off and shoved them into my bag. And after he left, I left. Um, and later on that night, I had a friend. Um, I reached out to a trusted friend of mine, and she was able to take me into the urgent care because I wanted to get looked at and all the proper medications because I didn't know what was needed at the time and what wasn't. Um, and so she agreed to take me to the urgent care, and so at that time I didn't want anybody to know, so I had lied to my family and told them that me and my friend were gonna go get food, um, which was obviously not the case. However, we did get food after, but um, basically, I went to the doctor. She was asking me like, oh, all these different questions, and then she asked me if it was consensual. And in the car, my friend and I had talked about if I didn't want anybody to know um, that I need to be careful with how I word things because if they get suspicious, then or if they find out, then I'm going to be forced to report it. So I basically told her, well, I don't really want to get into that too much. And looking back at that, that was probably very suspicious. But either she knew and didn't feel comfortable forcing me to report it, or she was kind of like, honestly, I don't really know what was going through her mind at that time. But basically, after I got all these medications and um, there was meds being sent to the pharmacy, so I felt like I kind of had to tell my family. And after after some convincing from my friend, I decided to tell them when I got home. So after we had stopped to get food, we took me home and I sat my family down. My mom was at her house at the time, so she got told second, but I sat my family down and basically told them what had happened. Um, they were obviously met with some shock and some like hurt that I didn't come to them when it had first happened. And then that's when my mom had gotten involved because my dad messaged her, and so she came over to the house. Um, and basically we came up with the plan, and at the time I really didn't want to report it, but my family felt that it was obviously a necessity, and looking back at that as well, obviously it was very much a necessity. And I would thank them over and over for forcing me to report it. Um, and obviously that's not the case for everybody, but in my case, it was what was important at the time and has served such a moral and emotional purpose to me um, since that day. Um, so my dad had to work that night. So mom my mom didn't decide, but she offered to take me to the police station because we had called our local sheriffs and they said that you have to report it to the city police of whatever city it happened in. So we had to drive to the city that it happened in, and basically we got there. The office was kind of closed, but you were able to hit a button to call dispatch. So we hit the button and said that we had called um, the police department because was this is what had happened and we needed to report it and we need a detective and that kind of information. So they buzzed us in the door and we had to wait for two officers to arrive. And during that time, I was just kind of getting more and more anxious. And my mom was trying to calm my nerves, and we were trying to talk through things and all of that stuff. And so the officers got there maybe like 20 minutes after we arrived and began taking my report. My mom didn't really have too much information other than what I had already given her, since she wasn't the driver, so she couldn't really describe things such as like my body after or like my mood or anything like that. She wasn't there to speak to those things, and she was told secondly. So she was there basically just on what I had told her. And so she they had questions for her. She answered those questions. I answered a lot of the questions that they had for me. I had to turn in the towels that I had taken. I had to turn in the photo electronically that I had taken. I had to write a report. I had to be questioned. And then they had to call a detective because they couldn't technically question me outside of scope or question me too in depth since I was a minor until they got further okay. And so in between that time, it was about 15 minutes. A detective had showed up. This was late at night, so um, we were the only people there. He followed up with his in-depth questions. Um, basically, like, did I know the person? Do I think this was intentional? Like, did I give off any signs? All these basic questions. And at the time, I just felt like I was being kind of not shamed, but it was like, well, they were just kind of like feeding into my guilt on like why I didn't do anything, like why I didn't fight back, all of those things. And I didn't really understand why I was being met with that kind of um, response. And so he had, so I was just kind of left shocked and speechless. So I just kind of went with the motions, and I had never gone through this before, so I didn't know what to expect or what to come of it and what to understand and what was protocol and what wasn't. And so he decided that it would have been a good idea for me to get a SART exam, which is the fancy way of saying a rape kit. And basically, my mom and I had to follow these two officers to another address where we were met with this, like, I think she was a doctor of some sorts. They basically, the way she explained it was they have to do a rotation to where her and her colleagues work at that department every so often, and they rotate. Um, so we the police had gotten there and given her all the information on their end that they had to give her like numbers and codes and all of that stuff, and then they left and she began giving me like the rundown of what was going to happen, her questions that she had. I had to wait for an advocate to show up. So then the advocate came, gave me her rundown, and then we were escorted back to a tiny, tiny room that me, the examiner, and the advocate were in. And they began with the kit. um, it's very invasive. They basically had to take photos, swabs of everything. I had to do a urine test. I had to um, give saliva, like all of those things. And they get very invasive with it. Um, I had to get um, blood work, all of that stuff as well. So it's very like basic things and very invasive. So it's very kind of it, when your body's already going through a numb state, it already is shocked enough. And I was just kind of numb. Um, Thankfully, I had that advocate there. I know some people aren't that lucky, and I was able to just kind of talk about random stuff to keep my mind off of it. Um, and she really did her job well, which is another thing I know a lot of people don't have access to is, yeah, they may have access to an advocate, but that advocate necessarily doesn't always care. And I lucked out by being able to have one that actually cared and did her job and told me all the ropes and all of that stuff. And so by the time we finished that, me and my mom had left. It was like 1:30 in the morning, and I was dropped back off at my dad's, and then when I woke up that morning, I had to go back to the police station and do follow up interrogation. And I call it interrogation because the way that this started leading, it seemed more of an interrogation more than a simple victim questioning. And I went there. I was basically just, they were harping at me on why I didn't contact anybody, why I didn't stop it, why I didn't fight back, like what I did and what I didn't do and what this guy was doing and did I want it and why didn't I vocally protest that I didn't want it, and how even though I was underage at the time, I did look older and all of that stuff and more mature and if I wanted it and just all these things over and over and over again, which were met with dismay, and I was just met with like this sense of, are you really coming at me after I just suffered and survived that situation? And basically, I was just like to the point where I was, if I had taken any more, I was gonna not be able to deal with myself in a professional manner that is appropriate. And so they kind of wrapped up, and I was taken back inside, and they took my dad outside and started beginning to give him, like, ask him questions. Luckily, I had a family friend that worked at that police station as a receptionist, and so I was able to talk to her during that time because I was kind of confused as to why they would take my dad outside and leave me inside. And um, about 5 minutes later, I we were in the car, and my dad began saying that they were basically um, questioning him on why nobody was there, why I didn't stand up for myself, why um, like my dad's and all of my dad's perspectives on things, um, which my dad was even like, I don't know why they came at me like that, because it's just very unprofessional and it's very harsh to come at not just a victim but their family like that. And basically we and I'm sorry I'm saying basically a lot. It's just what kind of is coming out right now. Um, we began our journey home, and then periodically I would have to come back and do more interviews, more questionings, more all of these things. And then we were told that they had um, gotten contacted by the gym, which during this whole thing, the gym was reaching out saying that if I needed to talk to them, I could go talk to them. But I was at the point where it was like, I've already been having to talk to people. I don't need to talk to them. Um, and so they had called the police and said, well, we have so and so here. uh, We don't feel comfortable with him here. I know you guys had been contacting about him. Do you guys mind coming to pick him up? So we were told that the police had picked him up and they began questioning him. And then I was brought in and told, well, your stories don't line up. Like, we interrogated him and your stories aren't lining up. We'll send all the paperwork to the DA's office, so now we just have to wait. Um, and keep in mind, I was underage. His age is like 35. I was 16. So even if like our stories didn't line up, which obviously our stories aren't going to line up to a certain degree, because he's being he's being accused of something he did, and he's not going to want to take the rap for it. So he's obviously going to do anything he can to de-escalate the situation and get himself out. So they after that, they told me, well, here's the number of the DA if you want to reach out. Um, and then a few weeks later, I got messaged by the family advocate group, and they said, well, the DA didn't find enough evidence to press charges, so therefore nothing's going to happen. And I honestly was just shocked. I was very confused. Um, as to how there wasn't that much evidence. And yeah, I just don't fully. I was just very. I just shut down. I um, was very confused, very like just in awe of how that could be the reality. Um, so at that time, I had began dabbling into things that weren't special, like weren't safe of me to do, and a lot of people don't understand it. At times, I don't understand it. There's a term for it. It's called hypersexuality. Um, in my way of wording it, what happened to me was in that moment in my mind, that was all I was good for, was giving people what they wanted of me, um, in terms of my body and um, my body and sometimes my voice, which in this moment my voice wasn't even important, um, because that's not what anybody wanted. And just wanted people to be happy. And in that moment, that's what I felt like I was only good for. And so I seeked that out. And a lot of trauma has come with it, and a lot of paranoia has come with it, and a lot of um, coping has had to come of it. And so I was dealing with all of that stuff, and I became mentally depressed. Um, and I had been dealing with depression, but it became to the point where I did have suicidal ideations. I did have an attempt, um, I had to do group therapy, and within that group therapy, the counselor had told me, well, um, all of this stuff is not seeming fair. And at the time of this incident, I did receive um, raise like rape crisis counseling, and so at that time, I wasn't ready to really open up and discuss it. And I already had seen a counselor since I was 8 for every week since I was 8. Um, and it was just very hard for me to open up about it. And everybody had said, "Well, why don't you write about it? Why don't you like kind of I know you like to write. Why don't you write about it and just use that as an outlet of coping?" And I was like, "No, that doesn't make sense to do because I'm going to relive all of it over and over and over again." And then I finally gave in and wrote my first very, very basic, mediocre book, which was Time of Trauma. And so I had given that to the crisis counselor, um, not the crisis counselor, the group counselor, sorry. And so I'd given that to the group counselor and basically said, like, yeah, I don't feel like this is fair either. And she said, well, why don't you try to obtain a piece of the report? So I went to the police station literally right after that therapy session, and um, I requested records, and they said that it can take up to 2 weeks, which I was very confused about because it's a piece of paper. All you have to do is press print and stamp it, and it's good to go. So I was very confused on that aspect. Um, and I had to pay for it. So then I, the 2 weeks go by, I finally get the report and I begin to read it, and like at least 6 pages worth of paper is just all redacted statements. Whether that be mine, other people's statements, everybody's. Um, and then I look at the evidence page. It says all my evidence. Um, there was an incident with my evidence, and it literally off to the side. It was a column that there was a column that said all the different types of evidence that were in my case, and then on the right hand column, it was like their status. And so all of the things had either NA next to it or evidence incident. And that honestly just really irritated me to the extreme, angered me. Um, and so I furthered in my reading, and I was reading the notes of his interrogation, and basically it seemed like the person doing the interrogation and my basically the suspect um were just having a casual conversation, and there were literal wordings in there that said, yeah, we believe you, like, let's just try to figure this out. And within those notes they also um basically had determined that I was gay. At that time, I did not know that I was gay. I did not think about that. I did not make that discovery yet. And so they assumed that I was gay and that I wanted it and that I seeked him out. And the guy said that I looked like I was in my 20s and that I wanted it and I didn't protest against it and all of these things, which were just totally bamboozling and totally absurd. And so then I'm like, well, what the hell? Because I just went through all of this. Um, there's no justice. This is obviously not a reason, like, like to just let them be and just say, oh, okay, like everything's fine when it's not. And I trusted them with my body. I trusted them with um, my mental state. I trusted them with what I had gone through, and they failed me. And I was following up a little after that with the um, group counselor, and I had even provided her my printings. Like we went through it together, and she said, "Yeah, this is absurd. Why don't you reach out to a lawyer?" When this had first happened, I had reached out to our family lawyer at the time, and um, he to see like what I needed to do at that time, and basically his thing was, well, get some therapy, like we have to wait for the DA. Um, we can sue. You have until like 2 years after your 18th birthday to sue civilly, but let's wait until the DA. And so we called that same lawyer back, and we went to a meeting, and he basically, it was like being met with um a brick wall. Like it just kept bouncing off, and he kept like he kept just saying, well, we can't force them to do anything. Just be lucky that it only happened to you once. Like you there's people you have it way better off than most people, and I do acknowledge that I do have it way better off than most people. um but it was just kind of like at that moment I was just not going to put up with that. And mentally I kept trying to reason with him. I just kept trying to reason with him, and he kept trying to talk to my dad, and my dad was kind of just keeping the peace and all of that, and he just kept going and going and going. And I finally stood up and I looked at the lawyer and I said, "Well, obviously you're not going to fucking do anything, so that's why people like me are scared to report things and end up killing themselves, and you'll have to live with that because you're sitting here acting the way you are." And then I told my dad I'll be in the car, and I went and sat in the car. And basically, since that day, nothing has ever happened. Nothing has ever changed. It still is wiped under the rug. This guy is still out there. They are letting him be out there. Um, and ob- like I can't speak to what he's doing, so I'm I try to just tell myself that maybe he changed, which I know is highly unlikely. Um, and so after my first book had come in between finding out they weren't going to do anything and like what had actually happened. And so then I found out they weren't going to do anything, and I wrote another book with um actual information, quotes, like formattings, everything of the report in it. And that one's called Like Nothing Happened, which is my most recent one. Um, and so he, um, this man that had done all these awful things to me is just out there living his life with no punishment for his actions. And basically, that's what that's one of the finding pieces that made me turn over this leaf of the louder I get, the quieter these people can get, because the more I talk about it and raise awareness, and I'm not trying to sound cocky, and I'm not trying to sound like I have a stick up my butt, but if I'm comfortable enough to share my story, which the more I talk about it and the more I have conversations with people, the more comfortable I get with sharing my story. Um if my sharing of my story helps one other person out there know that they aren't alone, then me going through the hassle of sharing is all worth it. And I do realize that people do have it way worse than me, and some people aren't ever going to be comfortable with talking about it. But I urge those that are comfortable with talking about it to talk about it, to help those people that aren't comfortable with talking about it. Because there's so much wrong going on in the world. So much. And I feel like we need to keep the peace and know that even though we are victims slash and or survivors and this thing has happened to us, that it doesn't define us, and we can still live our lives to the fullest, and we can still make good in the world, and we can use our negative and it, we can use what negatively impacted us to positively impact someone else. So that is why I have decided to write about my story. Um, and I will continue to write about my story and what this road takes me through. And I will continue to speak up for those who don't have the voice, that don't have the opportunity to speak, who go through life and death situations on the day to day basis. And I will continue to urge those who are comfortable with speaking to do so. And that is why I have decided to start your Never Alone podcast, because my goal is to get everyday people to share their story in order to help the world become a better place and have a positive change. With all of this being said, I want to thank everyone for being down this journey with me today. Um, and just know that you're never alone. Thank you, and have a great one. Until next time, bye.